Welcome to Life Biz and all that jazz. This is a space where real talk meets transformation. This is a space for you to heal, to grow, and learn empowering skills to live your most aligned life and just to get your power back and feel good within yourself. Whether you're navigating mental health issues, grieving after loss, or just really want to regain your power and feel good every single day, then this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Jasmine Lashotto, and if you're new here, welcome to the family. If you've come back for more, thank you. Thank you for trusting in my vision and coming back for more. I do have to ask you a quick little favor. Most of you who are listening aren't actually subscribed to the podcast. So I'd really appreciate it if you could hit subscribe and help support my vision and continuously spread the word. This episode is another powerful one, but before we start, I do need to mention a trigger warning. There is some conversation about suicide. We briefly touch over my experiences with losing my dad. So I just did want to warn you now. If you watch this, watch with care and always put your well-being first. I will put some contacts in the show notes. So if you're in Australia, the best way to contact and get support is to contact Lifeline. Or if you're international, you can visit findahelpline.com. This episode is for anyone who's really questioned the traditional path of healing. And I know we've already covered various topics regarding healing, and that's what this season's going to be all about. It's going to be about showing you different modalities, different people, different professionals, everyone's different experiences to show you that you are never alone and someone else out there feels exactly how you do and someone else out there has overcome it. Today's episode is joined by Jesse Johnson. So Jesse is a therapist of 17 years. He's also a creative who has added some art therapy into his current modalities. So that I'm really excited to unpack that. I ask him a lot of questions. We get a lot of insight. He's a wealth of knowledge. So I can't wait any longer. Let's get into today's episode. Jesse Johnson, welcome to Life Biz and all that jazz.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's such an honor to be part of this. Yeah,
thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. So let's just get right into it. I want you to tell us more about yourself. So I've given the audience a little bit of a rundown from my side, but let's take it back and talk about your journey and what's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, as we were just sort of joking about, having met each other 30 seconds ago, it's fun to think, where I would want to even share from. So feel free to nudge me wherever it feels relevant. As I was mentioning, I became a licensed therapist about 17 years ago after, my own journey of dealing with existential challenges of being in my mid-20s and not knowing how to relate to women and feeling a lot of anxiety and probably could have been diagnosed ADHD, all sorts of, like being in the world challenges. And I've been in the mental health space for about 18 years. Where at a certain point I got really inspired to start working with horses as partners for human transformation, specifically around leadership integrity and non-predatory power, which we can get into that if you'd like to. And along the way, I've just really been diving into what it's like to be a human in this modern era where, frankly, like our species has a consciousness of its own possible extinction. And that really spurned a speculative fiction novel series. Your listeners are like, who is this guest? And so I wrote my first novel a few years ago and have been inspired. I mention that because I can talk about art as a vehicle for my own healing and my own process of sense making in, sort of wild times to be human.
Thank you for sharing that. I think what was quite interesting what you mentioned about it was your journey that sparked you to become a therapist. So is that something you decided to study from your own personal experience?
Yeah, I was lucky enough in my, let's say, early 20s. I was doing a lot of distance running, and I met some folks who were really experienced and wise and doing all sorts of different healing modalities, and had some really amazing healing experiences with folks that were just a little out of the mainstream. It wasn't anything too wild. It was just like using sort of more, let's see, It would be classified as like organ energy systems from Chinese medicine, you know, muscle testing stuff that's like really become
Yeah.
more in the Western mainstream these days.
Mm.
And just realizing how many of my physical expressions, like little running injuries and such, were actually rooted in characterological or emotional places in me. And when I got some support in how to like engage with those parts of myself, the physicality would shift, which was pretty amazing. And it really gave me a foundational experience that there's so much more to healing than, you know, single cause, single effect, or a lot of the Western, especially medical modality, is very much about a linear source of healing. You know, I listened to some of your conversations where you talked about the concept of medication, which very much is enabled by a single cause, single effect type psychology, which is very convenient, you know, and sometimes very helpful for some folks. And I think this was another experience that I had where I said, wow, there is so much more going on in our reality than I've been conditioned to believe or I've yet experienced, let's say. And so that was really inspiring to me. And I went to a Buddhist based graduate school called Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, out here in the USA. And that was rooted in um, a real incentive for students to embody their own sort of healing and their own process. So we were really encouraged to sit with ourselves, to look at our own stuff, and to become therapists from a place of our own self-informed practices and processes. And yeah, like I can talk about a lot of different times in my life, but that was sort of what was going on at that transition point.
Okay, so so it was a university and you
Mhm.
kind of got to follow your own path when it came to the studies. Did they have some type of framework that you needed to
Mhm.
follow and then you just relate to your own personal experiences? Or was it really just very relaxed and as long as reached certain points, you got your bachelor's, was it? Or how
This
did
was
that?
a This was a
Yes.
master's program and pretty traditionally structured in that way. I don't mean to trivialize the rigor. It was quite demanding in the sense that we were challenged to be with ourselves and with our peers in a really experiential way. And so, for instance, some of our exams, like you would have a final exam. I don't know how you do it in Australia, but if you had a university program at the end of the term, you'd have some sort of formalized exam, right? And
Yes.
so, right. So in some of our courses, we had what was called a warrior exam, which is to say that you have a list of questions that are thematic to the content of that class. And then you would study how you would answer each question. So let's say, I think there was N plus one based on how many students were in the class. So if there were 20 students, we'd have 21 questions. We'd go study those. And what ended up happening really beautifully was that it incentivized a cooperative process with our classmates so that we could really engage with the material together. And then when it came to the exam, we had two pillows surrounded by a circle of pillows. And in the middle was the sort of person receiving the question and the person offering the question. And it was meant to be a collaborative experience to get the most out of the question possible, rather than what can be, at least in my experience in Western education, a conditioning of challenge or, yes, like, let's give you some competition. Like if zero sum kind of mentality, there's only so many people who get A's or whatever. This was like, you were actually being evaluated as a question giver as much as you were a receiver, as one would in a therapist role. So it was really training for our work. And then the circle surrounded the two people so that you could ask your community. So it was really supportive of mental health is a relational and communal experience, which was really inspiring and also really challenging for sure. Like to be in the middle of a circle and having to, you know, come up with some sort of an original thought around a topic, but do it in a supportive way was pretty transformational. And it's
Yeah.
served how I want to build community in my life as well.
Oh, that's amazing. I've never heard of any type of study program like that. Like I know there's a lot out there, but you only really see a lot of the mainstream stuff. And that's preparing you for real life. And even when you mentioned about like it wasn't easy. You put in the pressure, but that's what it's going to be like when you go on and you become a therapist. It's not, there's going to be times that aren't easy. And then also understanding that everyone's different and having the perceptions of other people to help with as a group community, not just your own perception or, the perception of past people that you're referring to or referencing from, education and all the material that you provided. Yeah, that's really cool. I need to study like that. So I'm actually doing my graduate certificate in neuroscience. I have mentioned it on a few other podcasts. I wasn't not sure if you heard it in that one. And for me, it's basically to support the podcast and to make me understand a lot more other than my lived experience as well. I really want to, take this to the next level. And the brain is just so fascinating. And what I'm finding is the more research that I do, and even off topic and off what's actually allocated to me from the university, is there's just so many options for therapy out there. And I think it is too mainstreamed. And I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think depending on the complex of people's trauma or their experience, they might need something different. And I think the more that we can share about the different modalities and what's out there, and doesn't just have to be the Western medicine. What are your thoughts on psilocybin and that type of therapy? Like, obviously controlled. I'm not talking, anyone that's listening, I'm not talking about going to grab some field mushrooms or anything like that, but it's more, like a controlled, because there's a lot of documentaries I've seen on that where they used to do it years ago, but they started to get a lot of great studies from it. And then it was pulled from using it for PTSD with, we call it like the army here, like the Army Reserves or the Navy. I think what you call it military where you are. Yeah, a lot of people that had been in the military after they suffered PTSD, and then the therapy kind of worked. What are your thoughts on like that type of herbal medicine?
Yeah, I love this thread, and it makes me think of two things. So first of all, I want to loop back to the notion you said of like, I want to be in that sort of climate where and it strikes me that a little bit of what you're doing here, calling people on. You and I met just before this for the first time, and here we are in a bit of a circle surrounded by your community with the intention of producing something really humane and, I would assume, pro-social and supportive, right? I can get that from just the little I've heard from you. So even just to notice and acknowledge that you are already engaging in a version of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're so kind.
I know. And I can say that because when I'm sitting here with you, I can feel that pressure. Like we're in a recorded interview. This is going to be heard by people who don't know us and might judge us. And so I can watch that part of myself and my nervous system. And it's actually the experience of whatever my history is around being seen and being judged and being heard. And so, when I was listening to you today, really share about your history, I was thinking, gosh, you're doing it though. Like this is what you're doing right now as part of that, is adding to that collective experience of a new vibration of community support while also expecting the best of ourselves. And so when you talk about neuroscience, it's such an exciting field, and there's so many. I think one of the higher forms of neuroscience is to support the evolving definition of what therapy, or I'm doing air quotes for those not on video, what therapy, what healing, what transformation can even look like, and redefining that. And so when you talk about psilocybin, I listened to you, I believe you're talking to a colleague, Anthony, is that right? Really smart mindfulness coach, maybe, is what he was doing. You were talking about medication. You're talking about pharmacological intervention. And so it's important to couch, I think, any sort of externalized support for healing. When I was listening to you two, I was thinking really important to mention that, and I think he did a good job of this, that whatever we receive, whether it's a pharmacological, drug or psilocybin or MDMA, that is not the healing. That is potentially the catalyst for the healing.
Yes.
And so I'm not, I have experiences with plant medicine, and I wouldn't call myself, professionally informed enough to speak too much on broad strokes psilocybin, but I would say it anything can be helpful with the right context and the right intention and the right container. And certainly my experiences of psilocybin have been wildly transformative, but they're not transformative in only that vacuum. They have to be supported with ongoing work, which still comes back to the person. It doesn't do the work for us. So I'm a big fan of anything where there's a really deep understanding of how to facilitate the medicine, and there's a deep intention around why that medicine versus, say, a pharmacological or meditation practice or an exercise routine or a radical change in diet, among other things, right? So I'm a big fan. We can talk more about it. I actually have a friend from my program. A lot of folks in the more Eastern based therapeutic training gravitate toward plant medicine, as you can imagine, and people are really excited about it. In fact, my one friend that I'm mentioning was raving about the specific impact of MDMA, which is not a plant medicine, but a non-pharmacological use for veterans, especially, and PTSD folks. MDMA is having some amazing effects. Now, that's not to say that there aren't consequences. There's a consequence for everything. And we just have to decide how to work with the consequences or if they're worth it, right? But yeah, I think it's really exciting that we're, as a culture, as a species, that we're opening up to forms of plant medicine. Are you willing to speak about any experiences you've had with
I
plants?
I have tried it once on holidays. It wasn't so much, I think, controlled. It was more
recreational.
Yeah, in a country. I won't mention the country just in case I go back there.
Yep.
Yeah, so for me, I've always tried not to. Medications never doesn't really work well with me. So years ago, I tried some for anxiety. This was before I was diagnosed with ADHD. So you would have heard in that my conversation with Anthony. Yes. So I only got diagnosed a year ago after 36 years. So for me, it was just navigating life and creating coping mechanisms and a lot of masking. I did a lot of masking depending where I was working, and I just never, my body is very reactive when it comes to medication. It just was really hard to find a dose. I just didn't feel myself. This is obviously back with anxiety, going to pharmaceutical medication now. But I found that once I did find it, I'd have to keep increasing my doses. So I've just never really taken anything or had a look at any other options. The only reason why I mentioned psilocybin is the university near me is doing a trial. They've been doing it for a while, and I just saw something about it to try something like that, because I don't know if that would assist with everything that I do for myself now. So, I'm going to the gym. I'm really trying to, and I did have some time off the gym because I lost my little fur baby, my little doggy. But I always come back to gym, healthy eating. I'm 2 years sober. I don't drink alcohol. I'm doing all this stuff, but then it's just having that mind that is constantly racing. And where anxiety medication and ADHD medication, it does help, but I get to a point where I need to keep increasing my doses, and I just don't like how I feel with it. Does that make sense? Is my explanation?
Yeah,
I'm trying to explain.
Totally. Yeah, and I can imagine, if you're like a lot of folks that I've met with around, sort of the hesitation around medication, it's that it can end up being sort of a symptom manager, which
Yes.
at certain points can be really important and really valuable, but it's not it's not necessarily, in your case, we'll say, hasn't felt like it's got the traction of forward momentum with your healing. It's like a management, right? Like I just had a little caffeine to make sure my mind was less dull.
Yeah, I'm still
for this meeting, right? So that's a little self-medication, and that's not like me being a different person characterologically. It's trying to situationally be at my best for this moment. And certainly there's lots of ways to do that. But if I hear you right, you're saying it just something didn't feel right about having to keep ramping up just to be able to get back to neutral. And that's what, you're not alone in that. I mean, that's as I'm sure you know, that's a pretty common hesitation for folks and experience for folks. Yeah.
Because it does help, and that's why I'm not against anything. Anyone wants to try anything, whatever works for anyone. I'm all for people, doing the best for themselves. But I just also felt like I was just kind of coasting in a way. I just, with my business, which is separate to the podcast, I wasn't really like advancing. I just felt like dull. It just really,
Mm.
it did quieten my mind, but then I think it quietened the good parts of my mind. So now it's kind of finding that balance, and I'm trying a lot of supplements, so like theanine, taurine. There's a few different natural supplements, which is just kind of over the counter, that I've been trying now to see if that helps balance out my brain a little bit more. But I am interested, yes, in looking and research and trying some other stuff that is controlled, and also just to help me with my studies and to see, where I can provide advice. Like, I'm not a clinical therapist. Like, mine's just a graduate certificate. So, I don't ever want to be giving people advice that I don't know about. I'm always about providing things that I can back up, or getting people like yourself on, Jessie, that, can really show our audiences that there is a lot of other options, and they're not alone in this. I think that's my main purpose, is to know that if you do feel like something's not working for you, you can go to, there is something else, or there's someone else that you might relate to.
Yeah, I love that you do that and that message. So there's two things I want to say. I got to be careful sometimes because I am a licensed counselor, and in Oregon, at least where
totally
I live,
understand.
I'm not actually allowed to promote something like psilocybin.
Yes.
But what I can say, because I know a lot of your listeners are interested in sort of their own mental health journey, and good for y'all. I've heard from other folks that it can be useful and effective in certain ways, but also relating back to Jasmine, what you said, recreational psilocybin usage and facilitated ceremonial psilocybin usage can be two very different containers. Not better or worse, but just what I've heard from people I trust is that it can be very different. And to be clear about how you want to step into that space, because it is a sacred medicine that's been used by some cultures for thousands of years, and it's potent. And so that's all I'll say. I can't officially sort of make recommendations, nor should I, but wanted to be clear on that. The other thing is, we can move off this if you want. I'm fascinated with the medical world and the industrial complex, and very in line with you that I think medication is sort of a last resort type mentality for me in this way. And I'm curious about your experience as an Australian, because my understanding is the United States and New Zealand, your neighbors, are the only two countries in the world who are allowed to advertise pharmaceuticals on television.
Oh, really? New Zealand? That's so interesting. I've been to New Zealand, but I only went there on a cruise. So I haven't actually watched like their TV or anything like that. So I didn't know that, to be honest. And here in Australia, then they're so close as well. It's like almost one. We don't advertise anything to do with, well, you could say there's a chemist called Chemist Warehouse, which is like a larger chemist. They will advertise that. So what specifics are you talking about? Like actual medication, like prescribed medication?
All sorts. Yeah. If you
Wow.
if you watch, American streaming TV on Hulu or Prime Video or something, and you have the ad function, it seems like almost every ad will be for some pharmaceutical product. Yeah, for various, pain management, vaccines, and otherwise. So it's pretty intense over here, and we live in that reality without really having a contrast to any other. So I was just curious, maybe this is xenophobic of me, because Australia and New Zealand are not the same place, but you are right next to it. So I didn't know if any of that, sort of like blurred at all. Okay, good to know. Yeah.
The same with drinking, like with alcohol, we don't promote anything. It used to be a lot different, but now not as much. And if there is anything regarding gambling, another one, they've really cut back and they've made restrictions. Anything to do with, like people could get addicted to and stuff like that with health, they are pretty good in that way. But then I still feel like from speaking with friends or, other people in Australia that have been to doctors, a lot of the times, if you're not self-aware, they will just prescribe with,
yeah.
straight away without kind of asking what you're eating,
And that's right.
yeah.
Right. That's why I bring it up, because most of the folks who come through our system, they see, I think the prescriptive premise is so strong in the United States that that's like what they expect is, well, I just guess I have to take medication for it. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I have to take medication for it. And that's I think part of the inspiring part of what, we can work on, people like you and I can work on, and your other colleagues, is that may be a helpful path in addition to other things. But there's also, like, you're championing this idea that there are so many other ways to support our well-being and our health that sort of like help us have more agency and more empowerment in our health.
And something else that I want to try is there's a new type of breath work. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. It's called 9D breath work.
No.
And it's where you listen to the frequency, the music with headphones on. So it's like a 9D frequency. And you've got a blanket on you. And they do group ones as well. But you've also got an eye mask on. So it's personal, but you're also kind of in that group community. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of really good reviews and feedback from other people that have tried it and have experienced trauma in their life and, done therapy and felt like that they didn't really get anything out of it. And then they tried this. So that's something else that I'm interested in trying, because I think with meditation, breath work, it can be hard and scary to start with, but it can also have the right benefits for people, depending on what they're experiencing. But for me to come back and to kind of like calm my mind, just having some time on my own, on just sitting there and not doing anything. And something was funny when you mentioned about Prime, and if I watch any of those streamed programs and the ads come on, when the ad comes on, if I have an ad, I'm looking at my phone or on my laptop doing some work. So I probably don't notice them, but this is what I mean, like it's just when I can have a bit of quiet space for my mind. And this is going off topic again. I do go on a few tangents, but we live in a world now which we are so consumed by technology. It's go, go, go. I even think it's coming to a place now where most here in Australia anyway, if both parents if you're a parent, you both need to work. There's a lot of fast-paced movement. Kids are growing up with technology as well. There's so much going on now. I think our brains are adapting to that, but then can also be creating coping mechanisms or are also showing symptoms of, say, for example, ADHD. A lot of people are saying that they're getting diagnosed with ADHD, but then they're not actually ADHD. It's their environment. What are your thoughts on that with our environment and, the way the world is now? So I know you also touching on what you mentioned before is like possible extinction. I think that was quite interesting.
Well, I think you're teeing it up really well. I have strong thoughts. I actually wrote one of my master's papers was on transpersonal approaches to ADHD. And I think I mentioned, my mom, I didn't mention this, but my mother spent most of her career as a therapist working as a child therapist. And that was like in the 80s when it was ADD at first, and then ADHD became sort of in diagnostic consensus. And she kept me from that evaluation because she didn't want me to be hindered by it. But we did a little evaluation when I was 18 and going off to my bachelor's degree. And I was sort of like right on the fringe of being able to qualify for that. And I would say since then, I've worked with adults with ADHD and I love that kind of work. What you're hitting on is so important that I don't know the data, so I'm not here to talk about that. I can speak to what my suspicions are and my experiences with folks. I think you're right that, first of all, we are biologically not evolving nearly as fast as the tech is, right? Like it takes us many, many generations of human lives to evolve to our environments. And our environment is evolving exponentially technologically in the last, I mean, think about where we were when you and I were kids. I didn't have my first cell phone until I was 27. I think I'm a little older than you, but
Yeah.
that was 20 years
Okay.
ago. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't have my first iPhone until maybe 2012 or 13. And think about all that's happened even in that period of time compared to before. So I think you have environmentally, you have the tech aspect, which you're bringing up, which is so, we're just bathed in stimulation. And as you mentioned in that other, in one of your own solo podcasts, the amygdala is just getting crushed with information. And the algorithms are designed to catch. So, some people in neuroscience call it limbic hijacking, right? They want to catch us where we're emotionally the most fragile. And what they found is that fear and missing out, like shame, kind of longing, like stuff in that emotional arena, keep our attention. And that's what the currency is in this economy, is attention. So I think you have that presenting in forms that can be classified as things like ADHD. And then you have the hyper-toxic natural environment with all the things that all the toxic inputs that we have in our natural world, not only from food production systems, but we have agricultural systems and we have medical systems and we have thousands of other things. And so the inputs on our neurological development are so intense. It's hard to imagine anybody being able to have, some sort of 1985 neutral nervous system.
Yes.
And so all that is to say, my sort of grandstanding on diagnostics and I say this to my clients, I'm all for any label that helps liberate you to be more of who you are. And if that means, you want your pronouns front and center, if that means you want your sexual orientation, if that means you want your cultural heritage, if that means the language you speak, if that means your DSM diagnosis, then make sure that helps you be seen more fully for who you are. And for me, it didn't help to identify with the diagnosis as much as it is to understand how that might explain some of my own brain functioning. So I kind of hold that term at a place where it's most effective for me, which is like, I don't really talk about it. I just think, maybe the fact that I swear I closed the refrigerator door, like I could swear to you that I did, but somehow I didn't. Maybe that's something that I need to really have a reverence for my brain, and that's where it helps me. I don't know if you ever have those kind of crazy making moments where it's like, I swear I did that.
Yes.
And my wife will like, no, you didn't.
You didn't. And you're
And
like,
it's
okay.
like, oh my gosh, it's so humbling.
For me, it wasn't. When I got my diagnosis, I finally kind of felt seen and heard, because I'd struggled my whole life and I always felt different. And I also got diagnosed with OCD, and now it's not repetitive. Like I feel like that I've controlled my mind that much. In a way, I've taken control that if I do something that seems to be close to like a pattern thing, I used to count things in 6, because I had like 6 family members, and I did this from 11 till about 22, early 20s, because I would have the intrusive thought that my family was going to like die. Like it was really full on. And to think of, I was that young thinking like that, something must have happened to trigger that. And I did it. I always had to touch wood, and I did it for years. And now it's like I don't do any patterns or anything like that, but it's just the way that I have to live and the structure that I have. And knowing that, when he said that, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense now. And then when we talked about the ADHD, but then also now when I was on medication, like I've been off medication now for a couple of, maybe just over a month or 2. I only tried it for 6 months for ADHD. When I was on the medication, all these things were coming up, and my friend's like, you've got autism as well. How does someone just accept everything? So I've accepted me. I'm like, I am who I am. I am unmasked. This season of the podcast is called Unmasked for a reason, that now having the diagnosis, tried the medication, I know that what I do is fine. And yeah, I'm kind of just going a little bit in circles here, but it's more just some people want the diagnosis maybe to try medication. Some people want it to, you know, allow them to understand more about themselves. But then I think there can also be the side of it where it can be a little bit tricky if you have the diagnosis and start to fall into that victim mentality. I don't want to say victim mentality, that's a bit strong.
Yeah, anything can be a bypass. You could use that
Yeah.
term, right? Anything. And that's what I wasn't accountable enough person to take on a term like that and not have it be an excuse or a bypass for my own responsibility. And I'm in a marriage. It's my responsibility to close the darn garage door. And and then other higher stakes things, of course, too, come into play. And I guess I wanted to mention that environmental piece, just closing that thread, that people who feel like, oh my gosh, this is so personal, like this is something I have no power over. How do I deal with this? Just like, please be open to the idea that there are a lot of environmental supports, just cleaning up your environment, cleaning up your diet. I have some colleagues that do some amazing work on neurological functioning and their diet. Eat organic if you can, clean your water, don't spray your pesticides. Like, it's not nothing, none of it's meant to be like a magic bullet, but it can help give us a little bit more, like runway and space, to be able to, our nervous systems to settle a little bit more. And then in conjunction with whatever other supports that feel right to you, there's a lot that can be done. And you're not powerless, and it's not your fault, and you didn't do anything wrong. And there's a lot going on. And, and then we have to take responsibility to do something about it. That's one of my favorite lines. A colleague of mine says that we're not responsible for the programming that we got from our family of origin, or in this case, right, like the systems that create neurological dysfunction, but it is our responsibility to do something about it. And only we can, whether that feels fair or not, and usually it doesn't, only we can do something about it. So I just wanted that message to get
really powerful. No, that's great. I love how you closed off that thread as well, because I find sometimes I will just go off my mind's, I think of 1,000 things and I'm constantly going off. So I appreciate you closing that off as well and giving a bit more structure. Helping with the structure. Thank you for that.
Jasmine, I'm shaking my head because I know it all too well in myself, for sure.
Yeah.
We'll just follow all the rabbit holes. They're all welcome. All the rabbit holes lead back to the service.
Yes, exactly. It all connects in some way. One thing you mentioned, we're not responsible for our origin and what the beliefs and everything like that, but we are responsible for taking control, especially when we get to adults. And it's not easy because we can get attached to, this is who I am, this is how I grew up, these are the beliefs that I had. And I think in another situation I've mentioned as well in previous episodes is we can't control what we've been through, or if we've been through, trauma, but it is our responsible to heal from that, our responsibility to heal from that and, to come out the other side. We can't blame what's happened in our past. We have to take control now. And I think that's something, when you do understand that, you do kind of open up a bit more to where should I look to start this journey. So I want to speak to anyone now, and I'd love your input, is if someone is feeling like they are constantly going in circles, they've been through trauma or they're experiencing something right now, how do they shift, or what kind of techniques or advice would you give someone to shift from, that blame? I don't like the word victim. Is there another word we can use for victim?
Yeah, well, yeah, let's come up with one. I think it can come out of this part of the conversation.
What should they start to do? Yeah, I think I got my point out there.
Yeah, and you might have something to add to this just from your own experience as well, I imagine. And
yeah,
as you were saying that,
I'd love to piggyback on what you've got.
Let's bring that in. So as you were saying that, I recognize that when I say it's our responsibility, that can be a heavy term for somebody because so much of developmental trauma, just making the distinction real quick between developmental trauma and incidental trauma. Incidental trauma is the like one time, the car got stolen, somebody burned down a house, and worse and worse and worse, kind of all the bad stuff. Developmental trauma is something that most of us carry in some form or another, which is like, I was 3 and the way my parents interacted built up this sort of unconscious fear that I was going to be left alone. And that's like developmental trauma for a young kid. And so, so much of developmental trauma comes ingrained with a level of powerlessness. And so when I say it's our responsibility, if you're somebody out there who's thinking, what the hell, dude? Like, don't tell me I'm responsible. I can't do anything about this. I'm stuck, right? And I didn't do this. I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this. So to that person, I just want to say responsibility means something a little different. It just means that there's an opportunity for you to step into something that you didn't ask for, but you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. And I think that's part of what I mean by responsibility. You actually have a choice to say, I'm not really going to live a life by addressing this. It's too much. It's too beyond my resource, or it's whatever. But responsibility means that more like an invitation. And this is an invitation for you to step into work, but it is hard, and fair or not, it falls on your shoulders. And so the first thing to do might be to make sure you have, one level of support in your circle, be it a good friend or a parent or a family member, or even a pet. And I'm not being dismissive. Having done a lot of work with horses and I just have an amazing respect for dogs even. Like, make sure you have somebody there who can help offload your nervous system, because it's intense. It can be intense. So before you even start saying, well, gosh, I guess I have to force myself into therapy, even though I don't feel like I can, that's not what responsibility means. And we want to be really gentle and loving with that kind of invitation, because you're not a victim. And if you don't feel ready to step into the work, you're not lesser than. You have a choice about how you want to tell the story of your trauma. And you can absolutely choose for the trauma to be the climax of your story, or it might be the climax of the first book, but the support system is going to help you start the second book. That's the way I like to look at it. It's like, it's never not going to have happened. It's always going to be in there. You get to decide what role it plays in the broader story of your life. And I think that's part of when you say victim, we're sort of stepping into saying, like, what if the story continues and that was just a real low point for the hero? And now what does the hero need? The hero needs maybe a magical stranger. That could be a therapist, that could be a friend, a mentor. Some people have religious support. Some people have animal support, a magical stranger, like Gandalf showing up when everybody's lost in the mines of Moria. And you're like, I can't. This is like, we're stuck. Everyone's dead all around us and we're doomed, right? And you got to decide if that's the end of the story or if there's a whole other movie. And help surround yourself with somebody who can get you to that next passageway so you can get through the dark point, because there's one thing I can guarantee is there is a lot of potential on the other side. And I'm guessing you can speak to that in your own journey.
You couldn't have explained that in a better way. Everything you were saying then, and I was also relating to my experience when you mentioned about having a pet. And previously I mentioned my dog passed away, and she was my baby for 16 years. And I had her from a little pup, and I went through so much with her. I lost my dad while I had her. I had breakups, I had a lot of hard times, and I also had my best years with her by my side. So life now looks a lot different. One thing it showed me is that I can get through anything. In that way, I built up that resilience and that strength, that all that work that I did do that I kind of didn't really understand and didn't know that I was doing, and thought, I was, knew she was getting to an older age. And I just thought, I don't know, I can't live without her, stuff like that. But it kind of solidified things. And I thought, I don't know if I could ever get another dog when I first lost her. But then now seeing how much joy she brought me just in the smallest moments. And right now I don't want to do that. But yeah, I think pets are so underrated. And I think it's quite interesting as well what you mentioned about the horse therapy. It's called equine therapy, is that right?
There's a branch of work that's
Yeah.
called equine therapy, for sure. Yeah, that's not, I sort of branched out of I wanted to be out of the medical model, but yes, I'm very familiar with it. Yeah. And essentially, I mean, coming back to the theme of how powerful, it's going to sound weird, but just to be technical, interspecies relationships are such a high indicator of good mental health. So, like, I'm really not being cavalier when I say if somebody doesn't feel like they're ready to jump into a trauma therapy session, go volunteer at the dog shelter and walk some dogs. And because they're there, and I'd say the same thing about horses and probably tons of other species like elephants and dolphins and penguins. The ones I have personal experience with are dogs and horses. Their heart electromagnetic sensing is so powerfully attuned. This is why, like, therapy dogs exist and law enforcement dogs exist. They can sense things so powerfully, including your emotional state, your nervous system state, maybe even on the edge of some of your needs with certain dogs that are trained. But beside all that, they can be with you in a way that, as you said, just helps your own nervous system up level into like a mirrored state of love. So even if you did nothing else and you love dogs, if you don't love dogs, that's fine. We can find another way. But if you love dogs, go volunteer. If you're not ready to have a beloved companion of your own, go hang out with a friend's dog, go get some love, and be open to what that might open up inside you. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing about that. It's hard in the trauma space because we have to be very mindful of where everybody is. And there's people who are listening to this who are probably responding all over the grid. There might be some who are just like livid with us. And there might be some who are like, yes, that's exactly it. And then there's some that are like, come on, you can be more aggressive. I'm ready. Let's go, And so I think it's just to welcome all of those states of readiness. And a good colleague of mine who does beautiful work with adolescent boys around their own coming of age and rites of passage, he says it's okay to be ready, to be getting ready to be ready, as long as that's an intentional process. Like we can say, I'm getting ready to be ready. And as long as we don't stay there forever, it's okay to recognize that I'm not quite ready, but I'm getting ready to be ready. And maybe that means I'm breathing with it a little more. Maybe that means I'm imagining what it would be like to go introduce myself to a therapist or, a horse or a neighbor or share on a podcast, right? And take yourself through those steps and imagine what would it be like to actually be ready? Well, let's see, right? I just want to say, yeah, I think that says it. Thank you for sharing that.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about not just previously about the trauma, the different types of trauma. You mentioned one, developmental trauma. Yeah. And the other one was was it situational or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think those need to be like trademark terms.
Yeah. It was a really good point. And I was trying to listen and then I was like, I want to come back to that. I was really excited because for my circumstances and relating to my experience, my trauma, it was developmental. From my dad had bipolar. So but then also there was manic episodes. So for me, I feel like it was both, but I never realized it was developmental till I got older. And then now I've done a lot of uncovering and unlearning and kind of remembering parts that I look back on as an adult and think that was full on. Like, no wonder why you had this type of coping mechanism in this way and that. And I've really looked back at my relationships with, partners. And after I did some therapy around that, and that's, separate to other parts of trauma, but I found that you don't realize how much when you're growing up and children, when they have these beliefs and when you get to an adult, the way that you think and the way that you look at the world and the way that you perceive relationships and what you think's healthy or not, it does all come back to the developmental, and this is kind of swinging back to you've got a responsibility. It's not saying you have to do it, but I really liked how you mentioned about it's an invitation and we get the choice. And I do get quite passionate sometimes, and I also get a little bit stuck between, do I come across as this harsh approach because I know how beautiful the other side is, the healing journey, and how, I'm always going to be a lifelong learner. My healing journey and growth journey is lifelong, and I've accepted that for now it's not a destination. But coming back to like where I think, do I just be direct or do I be soft? Because I also think that if you are too direct, people might be in a really tough time and they just want someone to be soft. So how would you explain this to someone? So, because I have a lot of listeners as well that I find that I get feedback and advice that, what I said helped them with their partner, or, they might not be experiencing. There's the one side of listeners where, they're in the thick of it with us, and, they want to really be better and try to be better, or, they're progressing on the healing journey. But then there's the other side where I find they want to help their family members. And that's another reason why I do openly talk about, my dad taking his own life and a lot of the bipolar and everything like that, because I want to help people to support others so it doesn't go through that as well. So yes, that was a few questions. Yes.
Well, just so I've got you, it sounds like what you're saying is when you have the opportunity to be a supportive friend.
I start thinking about this stuff as I'm going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the many threads that can unravel. Yeah, I mean, I can even notice my own anxiety raise when you're asking that. It feels like pressure, and so I wonder if other people feel that. Hopefully, you don't edit that section, because I think it's good for people to sort of maybe even rewind it and see what it feels like to try to follow Jasmine on that request, because it's such a beautiful role to play to support someone who might be needing some sort of extra support, I guess. And so I would say it's not your job or mine as a friend. Like if I'm showing up as a friend, it's not my job to know everything about their trauma or how to treat it. What I can do is bring loving kindness and presence and an openness to be with them and see them for who they are, and to just be with that. Because I think the one thing I can imagine you can relate to, the one thing that doesn't help is to feel like you're going through something and you don't know the answer, and then somebody's putting pressure on you, whether intentionally or not. There's like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to do something about this, right? So just, it's not, you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to figure out what's going on for them or where they are. In fact, I would argue maybe none of us could even really know. And that's why terms like this, developmental, incidental, trauma, anxiety, ADHD, we really have to be mindful as clinicians too, when we're slapping that kind of label on somebody, because it's just a made up construct in the end. It's just a way to describe an experience, and nobody has the same experience. We're all in different bodies and different circumstances. So, remember that you can take the pressure off yourself. If you've got a loved one in your life, remember the best thing you can do is show up and be present, and just be available and be receptive, and look, be attuned. When your opportunity comes, you'll know it, and it might be really gentle. It might be like, gosh, I'm so sorry you're going through this. And if there's anything I can do, and maybe you give them a menu, if there's anything I can do, including, just being here with you, going to play disc golf, or helping you find someone to talk to, or nothing. All of it's fine for me because I love you. Right. And just being there unconditionally, I think is a really good start.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. I think it's just, sometimes it's the simplest things that can help the most as well. Like you said, just kind of being there, and even just doing nothing, having that person in your presence, and knowing that there's someone there that if you do need to send a message or call out to them, you've got that support. And yeah, it did help answer my question, because I often find that if you want to be helpful, and this, I know this relates a lot to my experience with my dad, because, he tried to take his life multiple times, and it got to a point where he turned his whole life around and he became an advocate for mental health. he was in there doing all this stuff and we thought he was okay. And then it's for me, it's sometimes hard because when you know someone's going through something, you can be there to support them. But then when you don't know, it's hard as well. But then if you know they've been through it and then they've come through there's a lot of avenues there. And I think it can be hard as well because a lot of people, and I've got friends and, family and like extended family that have lost people to suicide and they didn't know at all. So there's so many ways to know how can you be too supportive or no, not too supportive, but how can you be supportive and then how can you know in a way. So that's why I really overall the purpose of what I want to share is to educate people and to see that they're not alone. No one's ever alone. Even if you don't have any family or friends, send me a message. I'm always for it. And I know, that can often be taking on too much, but I feel like I've got the coping mechanisms and can set that in a way. I'm not thinking about boundaries, but I feel like I'm open enough and I've done enough work to, if someone reached out to me, I could just be someone for them to listen to. And then I think that's where I was getting at with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can imagine you've lived through, the worst case scenario of the way it can go when you don't intervene more aggressively, right? And I can imagine some of the regret and the what ifs playing in your mind. And I think as you're saying that, what I'm realizing is we each have to make peace with our worldview on sovereignty. That's a hard one. It's really hard to see a loved one go through what I can imagine you saw your dad go through and feel like, what if I did more? And I'm so sorry that you went through that. And at the same time,
thank you.
I wonder how you come to a place of compassion for yourself, and if it involves, a real clarifying moment of understanding sovereignty. Do we really have that much power to influence somebody at that level? I don't know. I think that's for each of us to unpack for ourselves. And I'm not sure I'm clear on my own stance. I know where I have to be as a clinician, but I'm trying to picture if I had a family member like you did, what it would take for me. I'd show up a little differently probably with my worldview around his, my dad's sovereignty. I'd want to know what is it that I can live with. That's kind of often my bottom line. And maybe this is useful for some listeners. My bottom line is if I don't really know at what level to intervene with someone I think who needs support, it is to say, what can I live with? Whatever they choose, I can be at least at peace with what I've done. And it's usually somewhere along the lines of real heart-centered feedback about like how they impact me. It's not about me trying to convince them of something, because usually persuasive conversations can be a little bit more disconnecting from the heart. And so what I try to rest in when I'm in those moments, not that I've been in a moment like yours, but in something on that scale, it's to be able to say, gosh, I really care about you. And actually, by the way, I did work as an interventionist for a couple years. It was not for me. And it was when my son was a baby and there was too much going on, flying around the world, getting people to treatment. But I actually didn't feel comfortable intervening on people in that way where they had not consented to it. And it didn't feel good. And so I learned from that to come back to say, like, I can really just speak from the heart. And I'm pretty good at giving first person feedback, which means I'm going to tell you what my experience is when I'm with you. My heart feels open. I feel seen. My world is better with you in it. And these are the things that I can leave on the table no matter what they choose, because it's the most I can show up for them. And I'm not saying you have to agree with that, or, there may be other, I'm not saying even that maybe that's not the whole ball game, but that's where I sort of rest in that place when I'm unsure, or when I'm like hesitant to go too far. Because you're right, there is a chance that you could go too far and it actually could be counterproductive in those moments. Yeah.
That's really important. I think it's hard because like you said, you don't want to put too much pressure on them, but then also you don't want to, not have them see that you have the support. And again, this is why I like to share and be more open, because for my situation, I can't go back. I I can't bring my dad back, but what I can do is sharing his story and, you know, his journey through a positive way, like the podcast or, you know, other work that I do, to hopefully allow other people to support their family members so they don't have to go through what I went through.
I'll just end by saying
Yeah.
that something that's been really transformative in my life the last 5 or 6 years has been reconnecting with my artist self. And I mentioned not forcing this in there, so hopefully it doesn't feel forced to your listeners, but tying it in with the trauma work. I just wrote a novel the last 5 years, and it was really a place for me to integrate and explore all of my hopes, fears, despairs, and aspirations for the world and humanity. And if you're interested, you can go to jessekjohnson.com if you like speculative sci-fi kind of novels. But the deeper, I think, support piece for your folks is that it really, like, going through the artistic process every day really helped me come into myself. So as we talked about that first step kind of idea, another thing you can do before you want to add another person into your healing journey is reconnect with some form of creativity. And I'm using creativity in the broadest sense possible. Whatever it is that you like to do that feel like it sort of tickles your heart in that way. You could go out and arrange pine cones and do Andy Goldworthy kind of art, or you could paint or draw or write a poem or sit and crochet or play on the piano, etc. So just connecting with that part of me, I know, has been incredibly powerful. And I think that art is one of the most culturally transformative methods that we have. It's where people can be really, like, instantly sort of exponentially mind blown moments are usually at the feet of some amazing piece of art. So I want to encourage people, if that feels accessible to them, to explore their creative self as another resource. And if you're so willing, I'd be honored if you check out my book. But that's my shameless plug.
That's great. I think art therapy is really important. I love to draw and I'm really creative, and that's something where I found why I have my own business now, separate, as I mentioned to the podcast. I worked in hotels. I had a corporate career for years, and I just pushed through, and I drink coffee all day, and then at the end of the day, I finish the day off with a wine, and I never felt like I was really expressing who I am. So started to transition in through my career, and I did my master's in communication, where I focused on marketing and creativity, public relations, advertising. And then that's when I've transitioned now into my own business, and I'm able to express my creativity. And then another thing that I love to also do is even just coloring in. I've got a coloring in book with some textures and doing stuff like that. And I also hope one day to write a book myself. That's a goal that I have.
Oh,
so
yeah. Fiction or nonfiction?
Probably nonfiction. My brain's having a bit of a more like a
like
nonfiction
would be like memoir. Yeah, like a memoir.
Yeah, but in a different way as well, like in like a third person, like me talking about someone else. So I've got a few ideas. Like, things come to me every now and then, and I've got like a little Notion page where I just add notes in.
Awesome. I hope you do it.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share today? I'm going to link all your details in the show notes. So I'll add your website in there and any other resources, or if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Through your website?
Sure. You can send me an email if you, I'm not necessarily that, much of educated on all the neuroscience and modern resource kind of stuff. But if you are somebody who wants, a book recommendation or something like that, feel free to reach out. There's so many good, I would check out Pat Ogden's work. You might actually be interested if you haven't stumbled across Pat Ogden's work, sensory motor psychotherapy. She's really at the cutting edge of sort of bringing in the developmental trauma piece into the equation. But yeah, feel free to reach out, and we're all connected. And I would say, Jasmine, just thank you for taking a shot to have me on here. I would say even the act of doing this together as people who don't know each other, and now I feel like a closeness with you having this specific experience, that like this is a form of creative and co-creative, I would say, healing. Just the fact that you created this podcast. So gosh, all the examples are all around where we can start to act in a healing way. And so hopefully your listeners can take some triumph even in the steps that you've taken to create something awesome. So I'm honored to be a part of it, and thanks for dealing with our we're probably about 7,000 miles apart.
I love it. I really appreciate your time today, and I'm really excited to get this episode out. I think our conversations, have really sparked a lot of key topics that I speak about on the podcast, but really opened up some new insights for the listeners as well, which is really exciting. Thanks again for your time. And I will, as I mentioned, I'll link all the show notes. And to my listeners, I will see you next week.